Hello, I'm Scott Wipperman, the pastor here at First Presbyterian Church. And no matter who you are or where you are in your journey of faith, know that you're welcome here. We hope you enjoy today's service on this video, and we invite you to come join us for worship anytime that you would like, or join us in any of the other activities of the church. For more information about First Presbyterian Church, please visit our website at fpchelena.com or call us at 442-4775. God bless.
Keeping score. This is something we learned to do at a very young age. Who got the most presents? Who has the biggest piece of cake? Mom likes me best. Nanner, nanner. And as we grow, we accentuate our ability to keep score. We develop it even further. And because we start keeping score with things like who has the most friends, or who has the best clothes, the most fashionable clothes, who's the most stylish, who has the corner office, who has the most wealth, who has the most likes on their page. You know, we have all sorts of ways of keeping score and seeing how things are going. But there's a saying. It says, if you're not keeping score, you're just practicing. But I wonder, is that really true? Maybe it's when we're keeping score, we're just practicing. And when it comes to really having to do whatever it is that we do, we no longer worry about a score. The score is unimportant. Because in order to keep score, the thing you're scoring has to be pretty objective. Something like runs or hits or dollars. And most things in life that really matter aren't objective. They're more subjective. Scores really aren't about reality. Scores are great for entertainment, for games and things like this, but they really don't fit into our lives. If I could, because the things that matter in our lives have a tendency to be much more subjective, much more ethereal, much more intangible, hard to put a score on them. If I could ask all the couples in the church, please, to stand up. If you're here with your partner, please stand up. Okay, now let's score. Which one of these couples loves the most? You just can't do it. We might be able to score which one of these couples has the most toys, but we can't score something that really matters more than having the most toys, which is love. Right? You can be seated. And the monk Thomas Merton wrote, "What I'm saying is this: the score is not what matters. Life does not have to be regarded as a game in which scores are kept and somebody wins. If you are too intent on winning, you will never enjoy the playing. If you're too obsessed with success, you will forget to live. If you've learned only how to be a success, your life has probably been wasted." And then a little bit later on, he kind of closes with, "I have discovered a superior form of resentment, an offbeat way of keeping score on everybody by refusing to keep score." Now, you may have seen the movie The Magnificent Seven, but a new movie is coming out starring the Apostle Paul, and based somewhat on this scripture. Then Paul came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Now, you might be able to guess the title of this new movie. It's not The Magnificent Seven, it's The Magnanimous Seven. Because Paul here is, I think, thinking he's doing quite a great deed by offering up 7 times to forgive someone. You know, there's a saying, forgive me, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. So maybe it is that we should forgive somebody once. So Paul might have come up, should I forgive somebody once? Or if I want to be big about this, 2 times? But no, Paul's going over the top here. He's saying, how about if I forgive 7 times, thinking that surely this is going to earn him a higher righteousness mark? Because if we can put down the number of times that we need to worry about forgiving somebody, well, it's kind of like keeping score, isn't it? We could set up a scale of righteousness, how obedient I am, how righteous I am, how faithful I've been, and I can broadcast that to everybody else too. Hey, I'm a 6, you know. But that's not the way it works, is it? Because one of the things that having a score like that would enable us to do is to be able to turn to our neighbor and say, hey, Joe, I'd really like to, be gracious and kind in this instance, but I'm sorry, you've used up all your forgivenesses. You've used up all 7, and I don't have any more to give you. So what, thumbs down this time? There was an author, and she picked her daughter up from school. And her daughter had another classmate that she had a strained relationship with. This other classmate was quite an athlete, and her daughter was not very athletic. And this other girl teased her daughter about it quite often. But this day she jumped into the car after school beaming. And she relayed the story of how this other girl, in trying to show off her athletic prowess, had unceremoniously fallen off the swing flat onto her face onto the ground. And at the end of telling the story, her daughter goes, "Karma." We learn karma at an early age too, along with keeping the score. But often, is it karma what we're looking for? Maybe not forgiveness. Maybe we salivate not just for karma, but for payback, packed down, shaken together, overflowing, right? We like to see someone get what's coming their due. Need any evidence about this? Just look at the comments to any online article. Just read the comments that are written. Christian magazines are great because sometimes those are the most vitriolic comments that get written there, supposedly by other Christians relating to what was written here. Yeah, we're all for payback. We're all for getting even. We're all for karma. Just look at Twitter rants. Just look at the ways that we react when we see that bumper sticker or have to listen to that relative at the holiday get-together. We're probably forgiveness, mercy, grace are probably not the 3 things on the top of our minds when those things come about, are they? So the author had to remind her daughter that as Christians, we believe in grace, not karma. So Jesus answers Peter, I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. That's how often you need to forgive. He takes Peter's magnanimity, is that a word, and raises it greatly here. Now there's some argument among scholars. When you look at the text, it's not entirely clear whether Jesus says 77 or 70 times 7. Back in those times, multiplication wasn't a very widely understood concept. And the way the wording works in Greek, it's not clear as to which he's talking about. But he's telling Peter that we need to forgive a large number of times. Matthew Crawford wrote a book, Shop Class as Soulcraft. And in this book, he quotes Charles Murray, Lyndon Johnson's press secretary. And Lyndon Johnson's press secretary said this, No one should be allowed to work in the West Wing of the White House who has not suffered a major disappointment in life. The responsibility of working there was too great to be entrusted to people who weren't painfully aware of how badly things can go. And Crawford comments on what the secretary said, that those who belong to a certain order of society, people who make big decisions that affect all of us, don't seem to have much sense of their own fallibility. Being unacquainted with failure, the kind that can't be interpreted away, business and political leaders often display in the actions they undertake on the behalf of other people. They may have something to do, messing up my reading here, sorry about that. That these leaders, that this may have something to do with the lack of caution they show in dealing with others that they deal with. Such lack of knowledge of their own fallibility also breeds the illusion they don't need forgiveness or mercy, and that therefore they would have no obligation to extend mercy to others. Jesus argues otherwise. Because he goes into the parable after he tells Peter about the 77 times. Therefore, a kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle the accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had to be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. "Be patient with me," he begged, "and I will pay back everything." The servant's master took pity on him and canceled the debt and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and begged and began to choke him. "Pay back what you owe me," he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, "Be patient with me, and I will pay it back." But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged, and they went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. "You wicked servant," he said, "I canceled all the debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all that he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brothers or sisters from your heart. But Jesus tells this parable. And you might argue, well, hey, isn't karma playing out in this parable? The one servant that has debt was forgiven, doesn't forgive the debt of another and gets called on that. And we can deal with a little karma, right? Doesn't sound all that bad. After all, we'd never be like that ungrateful servant, would we? We'd never do anything like that. But it doesn't take a whole lot of self-examination to see there probably have been times in our lives where we have not extended the forgiveness we've received to those others who may have some indebtedness to us. We often are so readily able to look on others as not as good or worthy as ourselves. We often fail to recognize how much mercy we have received, and therefore how much we ought to give. Because Jesus' answer, this parable, is essentially saying that you don't know how many times you've been forgiven, and you don't even want to try to calculate that number, do you? So, forgive. We've been forgiven much, so let us forgive others. Christ calls us to forgive, right? The Lord's Prayer that we'll say later on today calls us to forgive as we have been forgiven. This is a central point of our faith, to extend grace, not expect karma, to extend mercy, to forgive. It doesn't mean that we're condoning what has happened, the injustice that has taken place, but it does mean that we need to forgive. Now, the Bible commentators talk about this thing where Jesus says, not 7 times, but 70 times 7 you need to forgive. And what they say is that due to the fact that we didn't have pocket calculators back then, figuring out that number, 70 times 7, was a challenging thing. And what Jesus was really saying was a metaphor for infinity. You need to forgive an infinite number of times. You need to forgive infinite injustices. And we have some examples of that. Back in 2006, a man walked into a single-room Amish school and shot and killed 10 Amish girls. A tragic, horrific thing. And that afternoon, the grandfather of one of the girls that was killed spoke out, forgiving the man who did the shooting. The man killed himself as well, but he forgave that man. And the Amish community came to the family of that man and comforted them. And they were relatively poor and didn't have enough money for a funeral, and they raised the money and they paid for this man who killed their children. They paid for his funeral. And at his memorial service, there were more Amish people there than non-Amish. Martin Luther King Jr., when he was doing all of his work, stressed nonviolent love. And he went through great training with all the people who would be doing protests with them. They would go through this training of not reacting violently when violence was directed towards them. They went through practices of not reacting violently when they were demeaned, when they were yelled at, when they were spit upon, when they were even kicked and beaten, when they were jailed. They didn't react violently. He felt that this was a calling of Christ to not react violently, not return violence for violence. And this training settled there in the South amongst a lot of these churches, these black communities. So when Charleston happened, and I'm not talking about the Charleston of last month, but the Charleston of 2005, when during a Bible study, a white supremacist walked in and killed 9 members in that Bible study in the church there in Charleston, including the pastor. And the relatives of the victims of that crime, 2 days later, offered up forgiveness to the shooter, to the man who had come in and committed this crime. It is written by a professor in South Carolina. It says, as people of faith, we must always remember that it remains imperative that we seek justice. But as we seek justice relentlessly, we must also remember to show mercy abundantly. We must forgive knowing that we are forgiven. We must let undeserved grace drive our actions at the most difficult times when we least want to do so. We must follow forgiveness with works of reconciliation, and we must show mercy with humility rather than with pride. Ultimately, we must walk humbly but confidently in our faith. Jean Bishop had a sister. She was 3 months pregnant, and one evening her sister and her husband were murdered in their home. And a few days later, it shocked the neighborhood to find out that the murderer was a 16-year-old boy that lived in that neighborhood. And during his trial, this 16-year-old boy showed no remorse. He didn't confess to what he'd done. He seemed to take no responsibility for what had happened. And he was given a sentence of life imprisonment without the option for parole, which means he would go into prison and ultimately he would die there. Gene Bishop wrote that I supported the sentence when he first received it. Over time, though, God changed my heart. I no longer believe in the merciless sentence of life without parole for juveniles. I wrote to David Brio, the boy who did the shooting, telling him that I'd forgiven him and offering to visit him. He wrote back a 15-page letter confessing to the murders and making a heartfelt apology. She still goes and visits David in the prison. And this fact was one time of her forgiveness and her visiting with David and writing letters back and forth was broadcast on TV, talking about her amazing forgiveness for this crime that had been done to her family. She received lots of emails. One of the emails is one that I can't repeat here in church. But let's say it just wishes David no good time in prison and that he would ultimately burn in hell. There were a lot of other emails that were along the lines of things like, people never change. His evil is irredeemable. He got what he deserved. He made his bed. Let him lie in it. Things along that line. And she wrote, I never responded to that angry email, the one I can't tell you about here. I tend not to. If the author is reading this, though, here is my credo. The life of David Biro, my sister's killer, is not worthless. It is so precious and beloved of God that Jesus died for him. Jesus came to save him. God does not want David Biro to burn in hell. God wants him to come home. We can forgive, recalling that we have been forgiven. And hopefully we'll never have to forgive for a situation such as these. Maybe we only have to forgive for more minor things, like poor service or a late delivery, or being insulted, or maybe being betrayed by somebody. But even in those instances, we can remember these instances where people found ways to forgive that which would seem to be almost impossible to forgive. Life Covenant Church, just over here, whichever direction it is, I'm turned around here, over on Hobeck. They were doing an expansion. Their entrance wasn't particularly well suited for the church, and they were doing some expansion of it. And it required tearing out some of the foundation and putting a new foundation. It was a big project for just fixing kind of an entrance to their church. And Keith Johnson, the pastor of the church, laid out the schedule and what was going to happen. He went on to say, this construction is going to create inconveniences. We're going to have to work around stuff. There'll be dirt and dust. And at times, things in the construction project probably won't be done right, and they might have to be redone. And schedules won't be kept. It's probably going to take much longer than what we're being told for it to take. But remember, we're Christians. And so how we deal with the contractor and with the subcontractors and with each other through this process. Remember, we're Christians. And let there be grace and mercy and forgiveness. during this process. In his book, The End of Memory, Miroslav Volf writes, "In light of Christ's self-sacrifice and resurrection, the future belongs to those who give themselves in love, not to those who nail others to the cross." Living into that future begins when we recognize, maybe more than recognize, no, when we understand down to our very marrow that Jesus took our place there, uttering the words, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." That's the debt that Christ paid for us. So will we respond by keeping score, or looking for comma, or by living and offering forgiveness? It's our choice. Let me urge you to choose the last of that list. Amen.